Hey everybody, Will from 1 Kilo Weightlifting here today. We all know that in weightlifting, you are going to grow quads that won't fit into jeans and will be the envy of all of your friends. But what you don't know or may not know is that great weightlifters have backsides to match. So I'm gonna help you today grow glutes of steel and hammies of iron, but that's coming up right after this. Hey everybody, I'm really glad you're here. If it's your first time, please hit the like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you know every single time I put out a new video. So in weightlifting, we are going to grow big quads. It's just gonna happen. With the front squats, back squats, catching heavy cleans, even having heavy snatches overhead and overhead squats, your quads are gonna grow. But what is just as important is something that people like to call the posterior chain, right? And so we think about the posterior chain, we say it and say it and say it, but I want to give it like a quick definition. That's going to run all the way from the back of your head, those neck extensors, all the way down to your heels. That's everything in the posterior chain. But today, we're going to focus on the middle, the big movers in that posterior chain. We're going to talk about your glutes and your hamstrings. And those are the ones that are going to kind of counteract your quads. Why do we want to have good glutes, good hamstrings, right? It's not just for your jeans, not just for your friends, not just for Instagram. It's gonna make you a better weightlifter. And there's two main things that I think about that's gonna help you be a better weightlifter. Number one, strong hamstrings, strong glutes, they're gonna keep you in better positions. And then when you get in those good positions, and specifically when the bar is in the hip in that final position, we need to think about good hip extension and finishing tall, and that is mainly driven by those hamstrings and glutes. So it's gonna make you lift more weight. Number two, if we're overdeveloped on the front side, if we're just like quad dominant, we're gonna substitute bad patterns, probably back extension, stuff like that could cause some pain and issues. You might have heard the term quad dominant when somebody's talking about poor positioning. And so we don't want that. We want athletes that are equally balanced between quads and glutes and hamstrings, that whole trifecta right there. We want a good balance. And now I want to kind of talk about how to train them, okay? So we're gonna have the best exercise coming up, but first I want you guys to know a little bit more about how to train glutes and hamstrings. Before we dive into the exercise, let's talk about how these muscles work, okay? And there's three main points I want you to think about. And there are a couple about the mechanisms of action, right? So number one is glutes are for hip extension. They do a lot of other stuff. They abduct the leg out to the side. They externally rotate the leg, but we are primarily thinking about glutes as they pertain to hip extension and finishing, okay? That is their primary action. So things that we do in training need to have hip extension. Hamstrings have two kind of primary purposes. They are a muscle that actually crosses two joints. They cross the hip and they cross the knee. And as a muscle that crosses the hip, they are partly responsible for hip extension with the glutes. And as a muscle that passes the knee or crosses over the knee, they're responsible for knee flexion, bending that leg. Okay, so when we train them, we need to train the dual purposes, the two purposes of the hamstring. And finally, back extension is not hip extension. So I mentioned that a little bit earlier, but we don't want to get that excessive lumbar extension that substitutes for hip extension. So when we're doing all of these exercises, it's gonna go without saying, I'm gonna say it right now so you don't have to say it again. You need to brace your core super duper tight, keep it tight and squeeze so that when we do stuff, we're not getting that overextended lumbar extension. One area that weightlifters have to train is knee flexion. We talk about extension all the time, but if you really want to train your hamstrings, you have to get that knee flexion. And a couple of my favorite knee flexion movements. The first is a slider hamstring curl. So this is super simple. You could do it on a hard floor or concrete with just towels. If you have turf, use like a furniture slider, or you can get these at any fitness store. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna lie down flat on our back, bridge the hips up while the heels are dug into the sliders, and then curl your feet towards your hips and flex that knee all the while raising your hips straight up. So that is a leg curl on sliders, and we can progress that. A really great progression is to then take that to do the leg curl, and then when we go to the eccentric portion, we're just gonna do it with one leg. One of the main aspects of hamstring pulls is that they occur during the eccentric portion of a movement, typically when the muscle is lengthening, and so we want to train that eccentric portion really, really well. So the next one with some really great knee flexion, but it's also gonna have an awesome hip extension component. So now we're gonna start training combination glutes and hamstrings. We're gonna do a TRX or suspension trainer row to a hamstring curl. So you're gonna elevate your feet on a bench or a box. The further under the anchor point of your suspension trainer, the harder. So if you're directly under it, that's gonna be harder. And then you can even walk yourself into a negative angle, and that's even harder. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna row up and then dig our heels in and pull in. You could weight this with a sandbag across your hips. This is gonna be awesome. Think about the sequencing that you do this. Make sure that your glutes stay turned on and tight the entire time, and then pull with the hamstrings. Earlier, I mentioned eccentric lengthening being the most common mechanism for a hamstring strain, and that's absolutely true. And so one of the greatest exercises you could possibly do to bulletproof your hamstrings is a Nordic hamstring. So this is commonly called Nordics. This is gonna be hook your feet under an anchor point. I can even do it with a barbell weighted more than my body weight and a little pad under my knees. But here we just have like kind of a roller anchor pad. You're gonna hook your feet under there, and you're just gonna lower as slowly as possible. Usually I think about a 5-second eccentric, and then catch yourself. And we are progressing, trying to progress to where we can control the way all the way down. And once we do that, we're gonna have bulletproof hamstrings. Now, I don't typically like this exercise except for when we're really in the off season. I think it has very little carryover to your actual lifts, but I think it has excellent carryover into growing stronger glutes, and that is a hip thrust. I use these way out from competition, 12 to 16 weeks, just as a bulletproofing kind of thing, so that we're really thinking about glute activation as we're thrusting into that. Athletes can easily work too much in their low back or even in their hamstrings. So have them check, make sure that their glutes are firing to do this and drive up. I do these really high reps, really for some bulletproofing early in a preparation cycle. One of everybody's favorites for developing glutes and hamstrings is the RDL. I like to use tempo to make the RDL much more difficult. I like to slow it down. In this case, I'm doing a 3:03 tempo RDL. So 3 seconds down, 0-second pause at the bottom, and 3 seconds back up. So we're taking my time, really feeling the lengthening and also feeling the sequencing. I want to activate, feel the glutes squeeze, feel the hamstrings activate. Make sure that when I do this movement, only my hips move back. There is no flexion of the back. I'm not bending my knees overly, just a soft knee, hips back, hips forward. Tempo RDLs are incredible. They're gonna light you up. One of my absolute favorite things we can possibly do is to move into a single leg stance. So we are going to have imbalances when it comes to our backside, to our posterior chain. And so we have to address those imbalances. And this is one of my favorites, an SLRDL, but instead of using a dumbbell, kettlebell, anything in our hands, we're gonna do a Zercher hold. A sandbag is absolutely perfect in this. We're gonna hold it in the crooks of our arms. So we really have to brace, really have to squeeze. You cannot let that core wobble side to side or round and get down. So I think a Zercher hold, even if you had to do a barbell, would be absolutely the best choice for loading for an SLRDL. I love it. So try these out. These are really gonna make your backside light up. All right, everybody, that is it. That is how you grow huge hamstrings and glutes of steel, the 1 kilo way. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. You get some good exercises, good movements out of that, and your lifts will improve. So remember, like, subscribe, and ring the notification bell. I'll be back here next week with another awesome video from 1 kilo. Thanks a bunch.